The return to Umuoma was not merely a visit, it was a pilgrimage. 5 years had passed since Adobe and Abina exchanged vows, years that had seen Adobe transform from a first-class graduate into a formidable. The sun hung low over the village of Umuoma, casting long, golden shadows across the red earth. Adobe stood by the village well, her reflection shimmering in the water. For years, she had looked at that reflection and seen a girl destined for more than just the daily trek to the stream and the rhythm of the market. She was her mother's pride. Her mother, Neka, had worn her joints thin farming yams to ensure Adobe had books to read. Education is the only key that fits every lock, my daughter, Neka would say. But as the seasons passed, the locks seemed to grow heavier, and the money grew scarcer. The promise of the city. When Chinedu arrived, he seemed like an answer to a prayer. He didn't walk like the local farmers, he moved with the polished ease of the Lagos elite. When he spoke to the villagers, he spoke of skyscrapers, steady salaries, and corporate placements. To Adobe, he represented a bridge. To Neka, he represented a risk. Mama, please, Adobe pleaded that final night. If I stay here, I will only ever be a girl with a dream. If I go, I can be a woman with a degree. I will send money back. You won't have to work the fields anymore. With a heavy heart and a whispered prayer, Neka packed a small bag of roasted groundnuts and a few cloves. Adobe left the rolling hills behind, her heart beating in sync with the rattling engine of Chinedu's car. The veiled reality. The transition to the city was a sensory assault. The air smelled of diesel and salt, and the silence of the village was replaced by a constant, aggressive hum. The modest apartment Chinedu provided was clean but felt like a cage. As days turned into a week, the promised office job never materialized. Chinedu's demeanor shifted. The sophisticated businessman became a hovering presence, his mentorship turning into a suffocating control. He began to suggest that favors were the true currency of the city, that her innocence was a commodity he intended to broker. The tension peaked on a Tuesday evening. The city lights flickered outside like cold stars. Chinedu cornered her in the small living space, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He spoke of how much he had spent on her, how the real world worked, and how she owed him. I am waiting for marriage, Adobe said, her voice trembling but her chin high. I came here to work, not to be broken. When he lunged, the world narrowed to the sound of her own gasping breath. He pinned her against the wall, the smell of his expensive cologne suddenly sickening. But as he looked into her eyes, he didn't see the brokenness he expected. He saw a terrifyingly familiar light, the same purity and fierce hope he had once seen in his own sister before the city had swallowed her whole. The pivot of redemption. A profound silence fell between them. Chinedu let go as if burned. He looked at his hands, then at the girl who represented everything he had lost in his pursuit of greed. I have become the thing I used to hate, he whispered. The air in the room shifted. The predator retreated, replaced by a man haunted by his own reflection. That night, Chinedu didn't leave. He sat on the floor and told her the truth about the world he moved in, a world of exploitation and hollow promises. He admitted he had intended to sell her dreams, but her spirit had acted as a mirror he couldn't look away from. He made a choice. He wouldn't send her back to the village defeated, nor would he let her fall. A new narrative. True to his word, Chinedu used his connections, not the dark ones, but the legitimate professional circles he had long neglected. He helped Adobe secure an entry-level position at a local NGO focused on rural literacy. It wasn't the glamorous life he'd originally lied about, but it was honest. Adobe worked by day and studied by night, the kerosene lamp of her childhood replaced by a desk lamp in a small, safe room of her own. Chinedu became a silent guardian, a man making amends. He helped her navigate the treacherous bureaucracy of university admissions and channeled his resources into a scholarship fund for girls from her region. The graduation. Years later, the heat in the university auditorium was stifling, but Adobe didn't mind. She wore her academic gown like armor. When her name was called, Adobe Okiki, first-class honors, the roar of the crowd felt like the wind over the hills of her home. She looked into the front row. There was Neka, wearing the finest lace Adobe's first few paychecks could buy, weeping openly. And a few seats away stood Chinedu. He looked older, humbler, and genuinely at peace. Adobe walked to the podium. She didn't just speak of her success, she spoke of the dangers that lurked for girls with big dreams and small means. "We are not victims of our circumstances," she told the graduating class, her voice echoing through the hall. "We are the authors of our own resilience. Sometimes the path to our future takes us through the dark, but it is the light we carry inside that shows us the way out." She had arrived in the city as a girl looking for a chance. She left the stage as a woman who had become the chance for everyone. The auditorium was a whirlwind of cheers and flashing cameras, but as Adobe stepped off the stage, her journey was far from over. While the NGO work had fueled her soul, it was her first-class degree in economics that opened the doors to the high-stakes world of Lagos finance. The intersection of purpose and power. 2 months after graduation, Adobe was invited to speak at a gala for the IFE Foundation, an organization that funded infrastructure in rural Nigeria. She wasn't there as a guest, she was there to pitch a micro-loan project for the women of Umuoma. Among the sea of tailored suits sat Abinais, a man whose name was synonymous with telecommunications and shipping. He was known as a titan, a billionaire who moved through life with a quiet gravity. He had heard 1,000 pitches that night, but when Adobe took the podium, the room fell silent. She didn't lead with numbers. She led with the story of a mother whose joints had worn thin farming yams. She spoke of the locks her mother had mentioned and how she intended to manufacture the keys. A different kind of pursuit. After the speech, Abina didn't send an assistant. He approached her himself. Unlike the flashy, aggressive wealth she had seen in Chinedu years ago, Abina's presence was grounded and respectful. "The meeting, you didn't ask for charity," Abina noted, his voice a calm baritone. "You asked for an investment. There is a difference." The courtship. He didn't try to buy her affection with trinkets. Instead, he challenged her. He sent her books on emerging markets, he sat in the back of her community halls to watch her work. He realized that Adobe wasn't looking for a savior, she was looking for a partner. For Adobe, the trust was hard-earned. She had seen the dark side of the city's elite. But Abina was different, he treated her intellect as her greatest asset and her past as her greatest strength. The union of two worlds. The wedding was the talk of the nation, but it was held in the Red Earth village of Umuoma. The contrast was staggering. Private jets landed in the nearby city, and luxury SUVs lined the dusty roads of the village. The ceremony. Adobe wore a gown that fused traditional Igbo lace with modern architectural lines. As she walked toward Abina, she passed the same well where she had once looked at her reflection as a girl with nothing but a dream. The dowry. In a move that moved the village to tears, Abina didn't just pay a traditional bride price. He announced the establishment of the Neka Agriculture Hub, a fully mechanized farming facility that ensured no mother in Umuoma would ever have to wear her joints thin again. The legacy. Marriage to one of the richest men in Africa didn't turn Adobe into a socialite. Instead, it gave her a larger podium. As Mrs. Adobe Okiki Ease, she became the CEO of the Ease Group's philanthropic arm. She wasn't just a rich man's wife, she was a power player who used her husband's vast resources to scale her dreams. Together, they built schools that were more like fortresses of knowledge, ensuring that the locks of poverty were dismantled across the continent. Chinedu, still a family friend and now a successful advocate for ethical business, watched from the sidelines. He saw that while he had once tried to broker her innocence, she had instead brokered a future for an entire generation. "I once looked for a bridge out of the village," Adobe said during their first anniversary dinner, looking at the sprawling Lagos skyline from their penthouse. "I didn't realize I was meant to build the bridge myself. You just gave me the steel to make it permanent." Abina took her hand, knowing that while his money had built the structure, it was her spirit that kept it standing. The return to Umuoma was not merely a visit, it was a pilgrimage. 5 years had passed since Adobe and Abina exchanged vows, years that had seen Adobe transform from a first-class graduate into a formidable pillar of industry and philanthropy. But as the convoy of black SUVs crested the final hill overlooking the village, the high-rise glass of Lagos felt a lifetime away. The grand arrival. The village of Umuoma had heard the rumors for weeks. The daughter of the soil was returning with the man who had turned her dreams into a kingdom. As the cars kicked up the familiar red dust, children ran alongside the vehicles, their laughter mingling with the rhythmic thumping of traditional drums. When the lead car stopped, the silence that followed was heavy with anticipation. The door opened, and Adobe stepped out. She was no longer the girl in the faded cotton wrapper, She wore a flowing silk kaftan the color of the sunrise, her hair braided in intricate patterns that spoke of her heritage. Beside her stood Abina, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back, his presence as steady as an oak. Neka was waiting in front of her old mud brick house, the same house where she had sold yams to pay for schoolbooks. She looked older, her face a map of the struggles she had endured, but her eyes were bright with a joy that transcended age. The unveiling of the palace. After the initial tears and the formal greetings with the Igwe, the king, and the village elders, Abina cleared his throat. He motioned for the crowd to follow him toward the outskirts of Neka's ancestral land, where a high perimeter wall draped in white cloth stood. "Mama," Abina said, his voice carrying the weight of deep respect. 5 years ago, I promised Adobe that I would cherish her. But a tree cannot be healthy if its roots are neglected. You are the root of her strength." With a signal from Adobe, the laborers pulled the cloth away. The village gasped in unison. Where once there had been an overgrown patch of land, there now stood a 2-story contemporary villa. It was a masterpiece of architecture that honored the environment. The structure, built with reinforced stone and vast glass windows to catch the cross breezes of the hills. The veranda, a wide, wrap-around porch where Neka could sit and greet the villagers, shaded by bougainvillea. The interior, finished with cool marble floors and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a magazine, yet featured a custom-built outdoor hearth so Neka could still cook over a wood fire if she missed the taste of smoke. A home of honor. Inside, the house was a sanctuary of comfort. There was a dedicated library for the books Adobe had sent home over the years and a guest wing for the many relatives Neka insisted on hosting. Most importantly, there was a medical suite equipped with a generator and basic supplies, ensuring that Neka's worn joints would receive the best care without her having to travel to the city. The most emotional moment came when they entered the master bedroom. Hanging above the bed was a framed photograph of Adobe's father, restored from a tiny, blurred original. Neka collapsed into a plush armchair, her hands trembling as she touched the soft fabric. "My daughter," Neka whispered, pulling Adobe close. "The well I used to walk to. I thought that was the world. I didn't know the world could be this wide." The celebration of resilience. The homecoming turned into a 4-day festival. Abina had arranged for a dozen cows to be slaughtered to feed the entire village. The scholarship announcement. During the feast, Adobe announced the Umuoma Excellence Initiative, a trust fund that would pay the university tuition for the top 10 students of the village secondary school every year. The empowerment. Abina didn't just give fish, he gave nets. He announced the completion of a solar-powered irrigation system for the village farms, meaning no one would have to wait for the mercy of the rainy season again. As the sun set on the final day, Adobe and Abina walked back to the old well where it had all started. The red earth was still there, the golden light still hung low, but the girl who had stared at her reflection in the water was gone. In her place was a woman who had walked through the fire of the city and returned with the water to quench her village's thirst. "We didn't just build a house," Abina whispered as they watched the villagers dancing in the distance. "No," Adobe replied, leaning her head on his shoulder. "We built a testament. To my mother, to the village, and to the girl who refused to let the locks stay closed."